This is The Right Approach. I'm JW Judge, and with me is my co-host Barbara Hinsky. This is a podcast for writers to learn more about the craft and business of writing as we explore a new topic every week. Our guest today is Jeanne Blasberg. She is an award-winning and best-selling author and essayist. She has several books, including, as we're recording this in the early parts of April, a book that just came out, Daughter of a Promise, that is a modern retelling of the legend of David and Bathsheba. So that really caught my attention, having heard that story more times than I can, recount in Sunday school and since. And she is also a grower of organic vegetables in Wisconsin. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Yeah, same. And I want to start with creativity. And maybe as we were talking right before we started, you were talking about how, your creative well is being filled right now, where you're at and what you're doing. And so I'd love you to talk a little bit about, filling your creative well and farming and, having that kind of lifestyle and how those things all work together for you.
Well, could be a long answer or response to your question, but I am I've been a city person for 20 some odd years. My husband and I raised 3 kids in downtown Boston. We had a weekend place in Rhode Island where I was always a vegetable farmer and grew a lot of our food in the summers. But I lived in a community that was very close to my in-laws, and we settled there, and our family had the like the benefit of 3 generations all living within a block of each other, and that was amazing. During COVID, so much changed. We lost my in-laws. My husband's office closed. My kids had all left home and were living in other places. And when they did come home, they liked to go to that weekend house in Rhode Island more than back to downtown Boston. So we let go of that house, and we still have all the wonderful memories, but selling that home allowed us time and resources to do something else. And for the last 10 years, I've published, well, let's see, my first novel was published in 2017, but I would say for my whole life, I've kind of been a writer. For the last 15 years, maybe I've been really heads down in this novel writing endeavor. And as you all know, and the writers who are your listeners know, it's very solitary, takes a really long time. The decision to buy a farm in Wisconsin was really, the catalyst was COVID, food insecurity, the environment, really wanting all people to have access to the most nutritionally dense food. But part of it was also inspired by wanting to work as part of a team and seeing, your produce grow. When we put our seedlings in the ground, it's like 40 days and it's ready to harvest.
Yeah.
It's a lot of faster results. It's an immediate satisfaction of seeing food grow and seeing it harvested and serving it to people and nurturing those people. I've written essays before about the commonality of like raising a family, planting a garden, writing a novel. I don't want to like, I don't know. I think I have a desire to share something with the world, also to kind of be seen in different ways, to express myself as an artist, to express myself as a human in terms of like in cultivating things or writing words. But I think there is a common thread. I do like to work with people. This team of people on the farm really has been a boost to everyday problem solving and activity. And then just being in nature on the farm itself has been a creative wellspring. Like you said, I'm in the first weeks of a book coming out, and there is a lot of buzz or a lot of feeling like I should be doing this and I should be doing that. But as I get closer to the farm and it's spring and I'm hearing these birds sing and I'm seeing the blossoms on the trees, I'm starting to just feel calm and remember kind of the greater world and um, you know, whether I post one more thing on Instagram isn't really a big deal in the scheme of things.
You know, listening to you, oh my gosh, Jeremy just had one that came out. I've got one coming out in 2 weeks, and I feel like he and I both were in different parts of the country. We both need to stop what we're doing and join you on the farm, because the idea of feeling like, what's another Instagram post when I'm in the full on thing of, oh, I got to do one more thing, one more thing. That would be lovely. And so let me ask you, this is a working farm. You didn't just buy property that's a farm if you kind of get to it, but is it
We bought
crops
property.
or and do you have cattle or livestock?
Okay, so we um purchased a 420 acre farm, of which 272 acres had been traditionally farmed in a soy and corn rotation.
Mm.
And we had the vision of wanting to be vegetable farmers because we have a relationship with a fast casual chain of restaurants in Wisconsin called Forage Kitchens, and they'd be our primary customer purchasing our veggies for these long, like salad bowls. It's like a grain bowl concept, and the average ticket's about
Yeah.
$15, $12. You know, it's really heavy with lunch and dinner salad bowl type things. And so they wanted to buy all their produce locally and kind of have a proprietary farm. And we wanted to be that farm. So we have really two good fields for our produce operation. And then we've been putting in a greenhouse and other high tunnels for season extension. And I think we're going to be looking to put in a geothermal greenhouse so we can grow throughout the winter. So I would say about, given all the infrastructure, 10 to 20 acres is like dedicated to the area where we'll be doing produce farming. Then this season, we're going to be farming 100 acres in a organic corn, growing organic corn. We have about 60 acres of forest. So we're thinning out the invasive with goats and sheep. We're returning some of the land to a oak savanna. We've donated 40 acres, or we're working with the county, and they've cost shared 40 acres of a pollinator habitat, new seed. So we're bringing in pollinators. And yeah, we're putting in new fencing this summer and fall so that we can have our own livestock, probably a couple of head of cattle, but the idea is more not to process, well, it's not for the meat, but for our fertility program, to graze the grasses, to kind of create that circularity on the farm where we can then start producing our own compost, manures, and fertilizers, and in an organic way, also maybe start selling some of that to other people.
Well,
So,
how do you know to do all this?
I
This
mean,
is
I've had to
crazy
go to school
time.
on this super fast. I think my husband and I purchased this land and got involved with this venture, and the other folks on our team, knowing, you're humbled by how much you don't know once you realize, like, oh my God, we really had no business doing this.
Mhm.
So I have gone to conferences. I went to my first ag conference this winter. I usually just go to writing conferences. It was really fun going and learning about different tractor implements and just seeing a whole different side of the
Wow.
population in the country. But I mean, the amount of respect you have to have for the folks in our country who grow our food is enormous.
Mhm.
And I've just been humbled every minute I've been in this enterprise and learned more. So it kind of also falls in the category of your life really feels extended and longer if you're a beginner at something. And I definitely removed myself from my comfort zone and inserted myself in something that I kind of feel passionate about, health and food. And I have everything in the world to learn about how it's grown properly, but I'm putting myself I'm kind of walking the walk right now.
So with all of that
Wow.
going on and the learning that is a part of it, um, when and how do you make time to also write?
Yeah, it seems almost impossible. And one thing I'd like to say is that we purchased the farm in 2020, 2022. The summer of 2023, last summer, was our first growing season. And this latest novel that just came out on April 2nd of 2024, I think went under contract in November of 22. So, that just speaks to the long queue of a publishing process.
Mhm.
And I was while this farm was really coming into being and under our care, and we were taking off with it, I was in kind of that copy edit, proofread, go back and make sure everything's okay, writing content pieces, thinking things through, proofing the audio version. So it was more of the like blocking and tackling part of the process as opposed
Mhm.
to like that deep work where you're like, I need some time to think and do this. So that kind of explains to your listeners who think I'm like, I don't sleep at all, how a book came out this week and we purchased a farm 2 years ago. So they kind of fell in line with like the way things needed to happen. When the farm was really busy, I could, I'd have a month to like proofread something or rewrite something, but it wasn't like I was doing the deep work of creating something new or really trying to figure out how a novel would work. All that said, I've continued with a writing group that I met in a fellowship I took part in 2021. And in order to be in that writing group, I've got to show up with pages every month. And so I do maintain my writing practice. I think my writing practice at this point, it's like brushing my teeth and exercising. Like I don't know that I could necessarily feel good if I went through the day without it. So I always do journal in the morning, like a lot of us do. And I have a work in process. Um, I also it's a fictional work in process, and I have a character from Daughter of a Promise who I think deserves her own story. So that's kind of like a character I already know. But I
Mhm.
also find a lot of pleasure in writing short nonfiction pieces about my experience, because it's like this eye-opening experience with the farm. And I know it's not eye-opening to anyone who ever worked on a farm, but like I feel like a lot of my people who are back in the city, they have no idea how hard this is and how much of a burden, like financial burden, our nation's farmers take on, and like the stress of that. It's
Mhm.
it's pretty unbelievable. So I'm thinking my next writing project might actually involve um, both a history of my relationship with food, so somewhat memoirish, combined with like, it's like uh Green Acres in a way of, some of the funny stories that are happening as we're trying to start this farm. So I guess finding inspiration in the place you happen to land is one way to combine a busy job with a writing practice. It's certainly evoking a lot of memories for me, both around gardening, my mother's love for gardening, the kind of food I was raised on in the 70s, which was horrific, and the kind of food I am trying to make accessible for people now. I think that's somewhat of a story of America and industrial farming in a way, in our food system.
Um, if you're comfortable talking about it on a practical level, what does that writing process look like on a daily basis? I know, for me, it's changed in the last really 6 or 7 months because just because of how busy work has been, and I haven't had any kind of reprieve from it. I used to, I guess I have to say I used to now, but set aside time like first thing in the morning when I get up to do my creative writing, because generally there isn't any other time for it in the day. Once the kids are up and it's family before school, or there's the weekends and all that. Like there's not any other time for it. So if I'm going to have time, it's going to be before everybody else is awake. Um, Work has invaded that lately. And so it's been a little bit more sporadic. And yesterday, I found a few minutes to write 48 words. And that's all I had yesterday. Like that was it. I only got 48 words written down, but it still kept me in the story. And, I've had 6 consecutive days of writing something for the story. And like that's his own small, tiny victory. But for you, you journal, you have the writing, whether it's nonfiction or fiction. Where do you fit that in? And do you have goals each
Yeah.
day? Kind of, how does that work for you?
JW, I totally agree. I feel like mornings are the time that we can protect the most. You can always set your alarm clock slightly earlier. And as I've gotten older, and I've always been a morning person, but I go to bed earlier and earlier. And I almost like setting my alarm at an hour where not many other people are awake. You just know there won't be any emails, there won't be anything. And it's actually like this found time. It's so much different than staying up late at night. The
Mm.
morning is really like um, belongs to people who kind of want to get things done
I like
or
that.
have to go make the donuts, right? So I
Yeah.
totally am a believer that if you need to find more time, you need to like take care of yourself so that you can get a good night's sleep, but also be able to wake up. And then um, I guess I have a few rituals that I like to do in the morning, and I would definitely say my journaling is part of that ritual. I'm a believer in the Julie Cameron artist's way of 3 handwritten pages every morning. It really helps to kind of clear. It's like my therapy. I get rid of the garbage that's at the front of my brain. Um, and I used to reserve mornings for exercise. That's like the first thing I'd want to do, but I don't do that any longer. It's my time of highest energy, so I like to do my writing. I also, one trick I found, and also I want to go back, like staying in the story for 6 straight days, given a heavy workload, even if it's 48 words, you're doing better than I've been doing the last few months with some of this book launch stuff. I'm working a little bit more in spurts, kind of around a deadline. I do use my writing groups as a deadline to get pages out. But one trick I've learned is that I will write a scene and know exactly what I want the next scene to be, or I'll write half a scene and know exactly how I want it to end.
Mhm.
And that's what I'll leave on my laptop for the next morning, so that it's almost like I can't wait to do it because I
Yeah.
wouldn't let myself finish that way. And instead of finishing something and now I have to begin a new chapter and a new scene and I have to figure out on my outline, blah, blah, blah. I actually really try to do, like when I'm in a little bit of a groove, I will be like, okay, I'm just going to write the beginning of this next scene so that I have it all teed up. It's like laying your clothes out the night before. You just have to like basically put them on. And so that's one trick I like to use. I like to kind of write the first part of something the night before and leave that cursor in a place that's not intimidating, that's very easy to re-enter.
That's so interesting. I might try that, although I have less going on in my other life. So it's a little easier for me. But I'm like you. The older I get, the earlier I want to go to bed and earlier I want to get up. So I'm getting up at 4 these days. And but I'm in Phoenix, Arizona, and so it's hot. We
Whether,
are
yeah,
early, yeah. But I think it's like the old concept of saving money, pay yourself first, set your money. Well, this is the same thing. All of us have busy lives and you have families and whatever. So your day is going to get taken over pretty quickly by somebody else's agenda. So at least get your agenda done first. And I realize that JW, I know, is in that spot as a commercial litigator where unfortunately it's taken over his whole day. And I'm so proud of you because I think putting out 48 words in a day in your current circumstances is much harder than my 3,000 that I put out in a day where I have plenty of time to do that. So
yeah.
kudos to you.
I totally agree, because you could say to yourself, what's the point? Why should I do anything? But
Yeah.
you're not saying that. You're doing 48, and that means a lot, because we all know that staying in close contact with the work and the characters and like the the flow of how you see the story going, it takes a serious intention. And yeah, kudos to you
Well,
for
thanks.
Have you
Um,
written memoir before? I mean, I'm just wondering what were your genres before? And then how do you see this big sea change in life, maybe putting you onto new directions? I'm curious about that.
Yeah, so Daughter of a Promise is my third novel, and these three novels I think fit very nicely into an oeuvre or an arc of my expression. Uh, they actually share characters. Some minor characters became major characters in future works, and they also share some settings. So um, the first novel was called Eden, which is a multi-generational family saga set in a Rhode Island summer community. And before I conceived of this story and before I set pen to paper, I had been taking a lot of writing classes, and one in particular was called Writing from Your Own Experience. We were doing essays, maybe like 1,500 word essays. Each prompt that the instructor gave us for homework each week somehow led back to me writing about my mother and my relationship with her. Even if she said, look at the paperweight on your desk and write about that object. And I don't know, I was like, I had a lot to work out. So I feel like I wrote a decade's worth of personal essay on my only childhood, my situation with my parents. My mother died 20 years ago. I think I needed to work a lot of things out around her illness and her addictions and kind of things like that. I then decided, I really want to write a novel. I feel like I have a lot of emotional intelligence around these relationships, but none of my grandparents or my mother or my mother-in-law even should be the characters in this book. I definitely don't want to write nonfiction. I want to be able to elaborate. I want to be able to take bits of people and combine them and create new characters. So Eden was really born out of a lot of work I'd done around writing personal essays. And it became clear also that the themes I was most interested in were domestic, small domestic drama, resentments, what we inherit, what we misunderstand, and how people misunderstand us, and basically a desire to be seen and understood. And so I would say that I love to read memoir. I always, continue with my essays on my website, and I submit them other places. I've been published in an anthology with essays. So I wouldn't say that like the personal essay or the memoir is something that seems so incredibly foreign to me. I always do bring a lot of myself to my fiction. And I guess the challenge and what I'm seeing maybe as an opening as I move forward onto the farm and with food is that I actually have a slice of my life that might be relevant and interesting to other people and something I can like make meaning out of right now. This, a young woman's relationship to food and a journey around food is an interesting way to show a bit of my life that I think might be worthwhile, you know?
yeah,
Mhm.
and I think that, food and how we look at food and approach it is something that is having a moment. Um, and that might be the timing for that might be really good. And I liked what you were saying about putting your own stories into your novels. And I had considered writing a memoir about a backpacking trip to Europe and some other things that were related to that. And I'd started, ideating on that and taking some notes. And then I realized, what, like there were interesting anecdotes and stories here, but there isn't a through line for all of it that's compelling. And so I just in some of my novels, like in my third novel, which wrapped up a trilogy, and then in my fourth novel, I just took some of those stories and broke them off and was like, I want to tell this story because it's interesting, and I incorporated it into, the novel itself and the characters and how all those things happened and the places that were involved. Because for me, I didn't think it was going to make a compelling memoir, but it could make a compelling part of a different kind of story in which, like, the essential elements of truth are there of the things that are happened, but so are other things that didn't happen, and they're fictional, and it's okay to make them up that way.
Absolutely. I love to exaggerate a story. I mean, I'm guilty of exaggerating stories. So
Oh, yeah.
taking something that's real, a person, a relationship I had, an argument I might have had, or a bit of dialogue, and then like that, what it really felt like, infusing that into a character or situation in a novel is what, makes novels great to read. I'm sure you've heard the expression that says like memoirists are writing what really happened and making meaning from it, and novelists are obsessed with certain meaning and then like finding a story in which to explore that meaning and like really writing the truth. So I'm totally butchering that concept, but there's about like reality for memoirists and the truths, kind of the truths of the human experience come through. And I do think when somebody might compliment you, JW, or you, Barbara, and say, these characters, they're so real. And you're like, well,
Mhm.
that's not a real person, but like, yeah, I know that, like, that's an actual situation. The way
Right.
that person treated another person or what they said, or like, I don't know, you just, as you get older, you start to see so many situations and so many different types of people in real life. It really does help with the fiction in terms of fleshing people out and just recalling very interesting idiosyncrasies that some people might have.
Yeah, I had
There's
a really specific instance of this the other day. I was writing part of a scene, and when I was in eighth and ninth grade, there was a girl that I was friends with, and we were both just goofy kids, and we had, I don't know, it's just a relationship that I look back on and just really cherish, that we could be, junior high and middle school are super weird, tough times for everybody. And we just had a friendship where we could be really open and silly, and there weren't romantic feelings there for either of us, which made a lot of other things more tolerable. Um, and so, I just wrote the idea of that friendship that doesn't exist. And all we had was like a year and a half or 2 years of friendship. And then things changed, and, we live in different parts of the country now, and see each other on Facebook, and that's about it. But it's that short period of life that I really cherished those moments, and the idea of that friendship and that period of time, and a relationship that two people can have in that moment was just something I wanted to put into a story. Um, and it's the truth of that one thing, and it wasn't enough to be more than that. But it just felt like I needed to put that somewhere.
Yeah, I bet
And
if that woman reads your story, she'll
oh, I'm
maybe
absolutely going to tell her
recognize
about
the
it.
moment. What?
I said I'll absolutely tell her about it.
Yeah.
Well, I think there's nobody that's more nosy or worse eavesdroppers out in public than an author. You get in a restaurant and a couple at the next table are arguing. Most people would kind of shy away. No, I'm like scooting my chair and leaning because I want to get those details. My husband's like, oh, good God. Or in the airport, oh my God, it is just ground zero for drama.
Yeah,
It's so
there's
much
a,
fun.
sorry to interrupt.
No, no.
I was just gonna say my children are always saying to me, Mom, you're staring. Stop. You're staring.
Yeah,
I
that's it.
can't help it. I
That's
mean, I think I'm just listening, but then I'm staring. I guess I'm trying to remember it. I'm trying to take it all in.
Oh, absolutely. Get those details. Well, occupational
So,
hazard.
so I want to talk about your new book, Daughter of a Promise. and its foundation in the story of David and Bathsheba. And I would just like to hear how that inspired a story for you.
Oh, that's a great question, and thank you. I'll just say very quickly, Eden and the Nine, my prior novels, also have biblical references. So this isn't something I decided to do out of the blue. I am kind of obsessed with making ancient tales modern and showing, again, the timeless nature of our human struggles, mostly with relationships, mostly with, well, all kinds of relationships. So let's now switch to Daughter of a Promise, where I've got a young woman and I'm going to tell this story from her point of view, because in the original story, thousands of years ago, it was written from the male point of view, and her thoughts, her reactions, the impact that all these things had on her life was of no consequence and actually seemed like it wasn't interesting to anyone. And I was like, hold on a minute. All this stuff is happening. What is this woman thinking? Was she attracted to David? Did she want to be seen on the roof? Her terrible things happened to her husband. Terrible things continue to happen. I don't want to ruin the story for people who haven't read it, but it's quite a soap opera of events. And so that was one reason I was inspired to write it, because I do think a retelling is an amazing opportunity to revisit a main character's point of view that was given zero space on the page originally. The second thing is that I was studying this story in Torah study, and we were talking about consensual sex. We were talking about power dynamics in a relationship with an older man, a powerful king, and a younger woman. And I was like, oh my gosh, if you didn't know this was David and Bathsheba, this is like Me Too and Fox, all this,
Mhm.
all these people getting outed. And it was just like so timely at the moment. And it's always been timely. There's always been questions of consent, and there's always been a power imbalance in a lot of relationships. So I thought, it would be really cool, because these topics are in the news right now, to retell this story for that reason as well. And then in the back of my mind, I always knew I wanted to write something that went back to the time in my life when I started my first job in New York City. I was an investment banking analyst on Wall Street and had come out of Smith College as an art history and American studies major. Really had no business getting this job, but I did because I was an athlete and I did a great interview, and was just way over my head, and was really treading water. And so this investment banking training program starts with like a boot camp, and I was just like Betsabe was. So my main character is in a similar situation where, against all odds, she becomes like the top of her class and studies really hard, and she's got a lot of ambition, although she knows this is not a job or a career that she wants to stay in full time. It's very prestigious. It's impressing a lot of people. She's making a ton of money for her age. And so it's ticking a lot of the boxes in terms of like what's economically good for her. Although it's not really ticking the boxes for what's like creatively what she wants to do. Anyway, because I always wanted to write about that time, and because I thought the story was so timeless, and because I wanted the woman's point of view out there, those were the real three things that made me decide, keep going, keep writing this book.
I
I
really like
love the
that.
sound of all that. Yeah.
Yeah. And because that is something that I have, you hear the story as a child. You also hear it as an adult. And, I was reading in the Old Testament last year, and you read the story now and you're like, wow, that just hits a lot different, as an adult. And
Yeah.
like exactly like you were talking about, what was her experience, and what did she want to happen and not want to happen? Because there was a
Yeah.
lot that happened.
Yeah, JW, when you said you studied this in Sunday school as a child, I was like, wow. I mean, the
Well,
teacher glossed over a lot, as in
Yeah.
David beckoned her. She was summoned. She lied with him, and then she wrote him a note. I'm pregnant. Like that's basically three lines with a lot of stuff left out. And so my inquiring mind was like, "Whoa, let's slow this down,
Mhm.
slow it down. Like what happened?" And so, um, but exactly, there's so much in this story that's missing, right? And in this Torah study class I've been in for the last 20 some odd years, it's called modern midrash, and the word midrash is a verb which means to pull out. And it's also a noun because there's a whole canon of work which is the midrash. But anybody can midrash. Anybody can say, I want to fill in the parts that aren't explained, and I have got a lot of questions here, and so I'm going to write my own midrash. This novel is now set in 2019 or 2020, so I don't think it would totally count, but it's inspired by that permission to fill in the parts that aren't written and all the white spaces that create a lot of room to wonder.
Mhm.
Yeah. I think I just think it's super interesting. And you know, in my upbringing, religion was I come from a family that went to church. We go to church, and so I'm bringing my family up that way. But I'm also live in Alabama, and I'm from Texas, and religion, whether you it, we're just steeped in religion, whether people are church going or not. They're raised up around it, and so that's something that as I'm writing my sixth novel now, my fifth one was about a group of people who were from Alabama, and so I have found that religious nature of I didn't that's not even I'm not even saying this appropriately, but people are steeped in religion, and that has found its way into who these people are and the story that I'm telling. And there are biblical and religious references in the text where I think if it were people from different parts of the country, if it's the Pacific Northwest or wherever there is less of a indoctrination culturally, that it would be different. But I
Yeah.
really like the story that you're telling and how
Mhm.
authentic those experiences are to the people who, the characters that are experiencing them
Yeah.
in the story.
Well, I would react in a couple of ways. One is that you can take the Bible as a religious doctrine, or and I do, but I can also look at the Bible as a very early text and work of literature put together by a number of authors who are also drawing on traditions that came even before them. Oral histories, oral stories. There's these plots and these archetypes of characters that are first created in these stories that actually go back to like the oral tradition of Babylonian times. So there have been stories told in our civilization and a set of common plots, if you will, that go back thousands and thousands of years. So I think that whether you grow up reading the text or not, these archetypes and these stories have worked their way into our civilization. And the stories you're writing, JW, whether, I don't know, I think people recognize it. They might not understand exactly why they recognize it, but I think at least for Western civilization and people who are kind of European descent, I'm not going to say everyone in our country. You might come from a totally different part of the world and live in the United States now, but there's something recognizable about paradise, about like with David and Bathsheba, power dynamic, a younger woman being vulnerable to an older man's desire. Anyway, I would just say I would separate the idea of the religious and the foundational text of our civilization. And then I would also say that it doesn't matter necessarily where in the country you live, because I do believe that there are a limited number of plots and archetypes, and that somehow between TV, film, reading, and however you consume story, we're all kind of familiar with the basic ones. Fairy tales, they're I don't know, it's almost like a part of our DNA. They're in our cells or something. And I also like to say, with regard to Daughter of a Promise, you can be a reader that's completely illiterate of the Book of Samuel, the Torah, the Old Testament, the Bible, whatever, and still be entertained and like the story. I think it might be fun to go back and read the story. It's only a few paragraphs, and see what the parallels are. And but I do think one of the things I love is that great writers have been alluding to Genesis and the 5 books of the Old Testament forever, and it adds this richness. It adds some gravitas. It adds something hefty and intellectual. And so I kind of wanted to be part of that group. Maybe that's ambitious and presumptuous, but I do love the connection to other writers. You think of John Steinbeck and East of Eden, and how powerful that is if you've read the story of Cain and Abel and the entire book of Genesis. Like, what he did was so masterful.
Well, I don't think you can be a writer without being ambitious and a little presumptuous. And I
Yes.
think that's okay. I think
Yeah.
this is a great place for us to bring this to a close. But before we do that, please tell folks where they can follow you, and when you're making that one more Instagram post so that folks can see it, and find the works that you write.
Great. Thanks. Well, I'd love to connect with writers and readers. My website is jeanneblasberg.com, and my links to my books and my social media presence can all be found there. But if you want to go directly to Instagram, I'm Jeanne Blasberg author, and my books are available wherever books are sold. You can ask your indie bookstore to order it, or you can go to an online retailer, but you can also find out more about me on my website, again, jeanneblasberg.com.
Well, thank you so much. This was a really invigorating conversation, and I just really enjoyed it.
I did as well. Thank you so much.
Of course. All right.